This is the Hofstra Radio Alumni Audio Yearbook. Today is July 11th, 2024. Please tell us your name and the years you were at Hofstra Radio.
My name is Lon Fricano, and I was at Hofstra at that time, WVHC, the predecessor of RHU, from the fall semester of 1966 until the summer of 1967.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to share your stories. When you were at WVHC, do you remember the names of any programs or shows that you worked on?
Yes. Well, I did a lot of different things. I had a radio background before I went to Hofstra.
Hmm.
I had started doing radio programs on commercial radio stations when I was in high school, and so I was well acquainted with uh, you know radio procedures and techniques and so on of the day. And so I worked as continuity director. I might have even held some other posts. You did radio programs. Sometimes I would engineer for other people. One of my favorites was Fred Motley.
Hmm.
I don't know if his name has come up.
Oh, yes.
Well, Fred was an interesting character, and he brought jazz. He was a bus driver, and he brought a jazz program to WVHC, and I think it was weekly, and it was always fun to do. Fred had a cute expression. When he'd see me say, "Hey, Fred, how you doing?" He'd go, "Hey, hey, hey," you know,
Hmm.
and every kind of we all kind of fell into that. We imitate Fred a little bit because he was such a dynamic person. He had such a strong personality, and so we'd say, "Hey, hey, hey," in the tradition of Fred Motley. Well, one day, Fred Kunzman, who was my good friend and an engineer, class one engineer at WVHC, uh, he and I, after we got kicked out of Hofstra, went to the Virgin Islands, and we're standing on a beach, Lindbergh Bay in St. Thomas, right near the airport. And Fred Kunzman and I are just talking back and forth a little bit, and we go, "Hey, hey, hey! Well, don't you know a kid laying on a beach towel pops up into a sitting position and goes, 'You know Fred?'" So he was a character, and there were a lot of other programs that were created. Creative work was being done, and a lot of news and a lot of insightful programming and educational stuff. And it was a Jeff Krause who ran the thing created a very productive and creative environment for us to work in. He was very encouraging and facilitating. And he stood between the university and the radio station. I mean, he ran the radio station program and I believe the television portion where they didn't have live TV, but we did have live radio, and we were one of the only colleges that had a live broadcast FM radio station. So we were putting out 250 watts at a time when FM was not um,
Wasn't as
as
popular,
common as it
yeah.
is today. I started on AM radio, and when I was doing a program in high school called Teenagers Speak Out, and we covered such important issues of the time, such as bell bottom pants, um, long hair, the issues of the
Sure.
day, and of course at that time the Vietnam War, which was ever present in everything. So, um, but FM, my program moved from an AM station to an FM station, and I couldn't listen to it. I didn't have an FM radio. I had to go across the street to a neighbor to listen to my own program. But
Isn't that funny?
so yeah, but we put out 250 watts, and it was uh, very widely listened to, which not only was turned out to be what's helped save the radio station. But it gave a lot of people the opportunity to actually learn their trade that wanted to be in media and be in the news and be on radio and be on TV. And people flowed through WVHC and into those positions in the New York metropolitan area, newspaper writers, television people, all kinds of stuff.
Hmm.
So it was a very fertile place to be.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I'd like to go back for a second. You mentioned your interest in radio before coming to Hofstra. You mentioned commercial radio stations, and I think you mentioned, was it a high school station, or what? I guess what were you doing in radio before this specifically, and what was it that drew you to radio?
Well, actually, it was muscular dystrophy that drew me to radio. Uh, I I was very active in trying to raise money for muscular dystrophy research, uh, among other community things that I got involved with. And so we did I conceived a radiothon
Hmm.
in order to raise money for during the main muscular dystrophy telethon time, as they were approaching it. We set up, we had the Muscular Dystrophy Association provided us a lot of help and support. We had a motorcade. We had high school rock and roll bands set up at a couple of shopping centers, performing and being able to switch to live broadcasts, and we raised. Now this was in 1962 or three, I guess, and we raised at that time what we thought was a hell of a lot of money. We raised $5,000
Wow.
for muscular dystrophy.
Wow.
So, being in the radio station, in fact, I remember the DJ's name that was on that day. His name was John Anthony. And the radio station was WBIC. It was just an AM radio station, and typical top 40 format type thing. And so that's when I really got the bug for radio.
And you would have been about 14, 15 years old at this point?
About 14, yeah, about
Wow.
14 years old. So I recruited some a young lady that I went to school with to be my co-host, and we set up all these bands, and everybody was just more than willing to do this stuff, and we had a great time. We had some famous model, I don't know, Miss New York or Miss somebody, came and led the motorcade, and it was a great time. Got a nice thank you from Gary Lewis, and it was very successful. But that's how
Yeah.
I got the bug. That's how I got the bug, and from there it was, I wanted to do something else. So I went to my social studies teacher at the time, which was 10th grade, and got the idea I wanted to do it as a school project and involve. My school was Bayshore, New York. It was a fairly large school district at the time. I think there were about 500 people in my graduating class,
Wow.
and so I could set up topics. My father, we owned a printing business, and which played a great role in saving WVHC actually. But he owned a printing business and did printing for some guys they built a recording studio, and they were producing format and programs and demo tapes for people, and all kinds of things. And so they allowed us to use their recording studios to record the program, and then we would deliver the tapes to at that time WBIC, later to WBAB in Babylon, Long
Mm-hmm.
Island, and I'm trying to remember. I think maybe we even were on WGLI a little bit. And so when I went to Hofstra, I was accepted to the pre-med program, and I had been doing a lot of work in ambulance work and stuff, and I had a hankering to be a doc, and so they accepted me. It was only college I applied to was Hofstra. They accepted me to the program, And one of the reasons I applied to Hofstra was because of the radio station.
Mm.
You know, the bug was in, right? But so that was the recreation. I was going to school for the sciences, and then the recreation was the radio station. And eventually, I left the pre med program and moved into more of a dramatic arts type curriculum.
Okay. Today it's so easy to get information about schools and programs, and if you have an interest, you just go to the internet, and there's so many different ways of finding out. But how did you know that Hofstra University had a radio station at that time? Were you aware of the station? Had you listened to it, or did someone point you towards it?
No, I didn't have an FM radio,
Right.
so uh, and I had never listened to it. I found out about it just looking through the college. When you're looking to go to a college, you start looking into, you get materials, written materials. There was no internet,
Right.
so
Right.
you'd send for a catalog of classes, and so the tuition at Hofstra at that time was $50 a credit hour, which was a lot of money for my family. And but my father and my mother were both very supportive. They wanted me to do this, and so they ponied up the money, and off we went.
I imagine your parents might have been supportive of the pre med idea. What were their opinions about radio?
They enjoyed what I was doing in radio, and obviously my father had helped me with my program, Teenagers Speak Out, by lining up the recording studio. So my parents were always very supportive of anything that their children wanted to do within reason, and so they were proud, and they would listen to the radio programs that I produced, and we never really listened that much to WVHC because where we lived, we didn't get a strong signal.
Right.
It was only a 250-watt transmitter. So from Hempstead to Bayshore, that kind of, and you couldn't do it on the internet like you can today.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
you know,
depending on the way the wind was blowing, you might be able to get the signal or not. But
in
which
fact, there's a lot of truth to
yeah,
that.
no, I understand. So if you don't mind my asking, if because some people who were at WVHC during your time period often like to speak of the facilities and the transmitter at the time. And without leading you too much, what do you remember about the radio station physically at the time? What did it look like? Where was it? What do you remember about the transmitter?
The ambiance at WVHC was something I will never forget. We were in the basement of Mason Hall, which was right across the street, across the parking lot rather, from the administration building.
Uh-huh.
And it was a basement that had one room with the records storage, and you had to be a top mucky muck to have a key to the to that room.
Right.
We had one basic on-the-air studio uh, that was set up with an engineer on the other side of the glass, and there was a small office area as you first came down the stairs and into the area where the radio station was. And there was a small secondary studio that could be used, could be pressed into service, which was also used for administrative tasks and recording, doing some production work to get things on tape and so forth. We use tape,
Mm-hmm.
recording tape, and so yeah, it was a cozy place with a bunch of really nice people there. I mean, everybody was so nice. Dave Lamble, I remember well, Steve Rosenfeld, Rick Von Brook, just Marvin Schwartz, Chris Zuboff, Mark Wiener, who played a role, I understand, in retirement at the radio station before he passed away.
Oh yes, yes.
He and I were good friends. We used to play guitar together, He was a masterful 12 string guitar player,
Hmm.
and when I reconnected with him later in life, and I asked him if he was still playing, he couldn't because he had developed severe arthritis in his fingers, and he could no longer play the guitar. But Mark was an intelligent, dynamic, decent human being. Just so many wonderful people. Sue Chernus, Ted Ronenberger, uh, uh, these people. Uh, it was a family. It
Hmm.
was like a family.
Hmm.
You know, Fred Kunzman, who he was a first class engineer. Fred was one of the key people in the radio station at that time, and that's how we got into trouble, kind of.
Well, we're leading up to some stories, definitely. But um,
Yeah.
so when you arrived on campus at Hofstra, and it was, I think at the time it was largely a commuter school.
Yep.
Um, when you got to campus, how did you find the radio station, and like what kind of reception did you get? What did you walk in and say, "Hey, I've done radio, give me a show," or was there any kind of training process to getting on the air?
Well, not really a training process. I mean, I went down, I knocked on the door, they let me in, and that was their first mistake. And uh, everybody was very friendly and receptive, and I talked to them about my background in radio at that point in time, and fit in pretty easily with folks, and it became a passion like no other in my life at that point. I mean, I was uh, 18 going on 19, and this was a big deal. And we had Les Bear, another one of the
Hmm.
folks that was contemporary. I'm still in contact with Les uh, on Facebook. We battle back and forth over politics, and so we had a great group. And the more I think about it, the more names pop into my head, and the more faces. Uh, it was it was sometimes in life you find yourself in a unique place like no other,
Hmm.
and that's what it was like. It was magical. It was a magical place. Jeff Krause was an extremely creative, intelligent guy, and he gave us the room to do what needed to be done. He was all about it, and he was a nice person too. I mean, his wife Marilyn, after Jeff passed, wound up marrying another good friend of ours, Gary Armstrong,
Hmm.
and he used to do sportscasting was his thing, and I did a couple of he would do play by play. So I would do a little color, and he had an expression whenever the basketball hit the hoop, he'd go bingo, and that was like his trademark approach. And we just had so much fun, and we were learning all the time. I mean, we learned to operate. That radio station was no different than WABC or or WNEW or any of the big stations. It was just smaller,
Hmm.
but it was just as good. And it had a broad range. It was a block programming, as I recall. We didn't have a particular. It wasn't like we were just playing top 40 music, right? We were doing programming, and we were producing programs and playing programs that were educational, that were informative, that were creative. And it just brought out the best in everybody, and we all worked together to help each other get done what had to be done, because we also had our school obligations and so on. So
Some people
yeah,
took those school responsibilities a little less seriously than others, I think, given their involvement at the radio station. A lot of people spent far too much time at the station and less time on their classes.
yeah, that was um, it was intoxicating. Being in the radio station was almost intoxicating,
Hmm.
and you got, it was like a fly to the flame, a moth to the flame, to want to be there, to want to hear what people are doing, want to get behind the microphone, want to engineer, want to, do some editing on the tapes that you had. And we did, there were skills to learn and things to do. And it was simple. I would say, by comparison today, where everything is computerized. I don't know if I could work a computerized radio station. I like to sit behind the board and turn the pots and,
Hmm.
flip the A and B switches and spin the records, and you queued up records.
Yeah.
Of course, you ruined them by queuing them up. Eventually, you'd scratch the hell out of the beginning of the song, but it was a skill and a talent and a fun, and it was valuable. I think it was very valuable time spent.
Hmm.
May not have been. Maybe should have spent a little more time in biology or chemistry. That was not as much fun and we were learning. It was there was so much to know because the people who had come through WVHC were in so many positions around. Charlie Kay, for example,
Yeah.
who's still associated. He helped us during our marathon that we did, and so many. Dan Ingram came through the radio station. He was a huge DJ back in the day on WABC, and Godfrey Cambridge had come through WVHC. He was a black comedian back in the 60s, uh, doing some groundbreaking types of comedy and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so it was a place where there was a confluence of all these different people and energies and talents and abilities and dreams. And um, it will always be a very big part of my life.
Hmm.
Always, it will.
Hmm. I think a college radio station attracts a certain type of person and a certain type of personality, and especially people who are creative and inquisitive. But I like to go back and ask because it still boggles my mind that Jeff Krause was running the station, and he wasn't much older than the undergrads. I believe at about that time you were there, he probably would have been in his late 20s. And I
Yeah,
love
and
getting a sense of the man and his personality and how he fostered that environment.
he had a really deep, resonant
Hmm.
voice. I don't know if you ever heard any of the
Oh
things
yeah,
he recorded.
yeah.
Um, and he used to do a lot of creative things himself, like jingles and public service announcements and just creative pieces in the holidays and things like that. And he was a busy guy, and he ran the TV side of it too, as I recall. And I'm sure you've seen the movie Animal House.
Yes.
All right. I relate to the gang at WVHC uh, in very much the same way I think about Animal House. Now, most of us were in a fraternity called Pipe and Bowl, which is not like the big Greek fraternities.
Hmm.
It was a much more humane bunch of people, family oriented. Although we had some fun, and uh, but the people who were drawn to WVHC, there's a difference between action potential and action orientation,
Hmm.
right? So people you can have action potential and never do anything with it. You know, how many times have you heard somebody say, "Oh, you had so much potential," right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But we had action orientation. We would the folks that were at that radio station were doers. They would get it done. They'd go knock on a door. They'd go interview somebody. They would go find something that we needed if we didn't have money or we didn't have tape or we didn't have things that we needed at the radio station. They would magically we'd get it done somehow through various connections. And I remember one time Jeff had lined us up for the American Tobacco Company.
Hmm.
Had a big, huge building in New York City. And in the building, they had a production one floor there where they had TV studio, um, and audio studios to produce commercials for the American Tobacco Company. And so he had made a connection there with somebody that said, well, they had some old audio equipment they were going to be replacing, and would Hofstra be interested in it since we had a radio station,
Hmm.
right? So a bunch of us got together. We got into some gray jumpsuits. Jeff rented us like a big, I don't know if it was U-Haul, but it was like a U-Haul truck, and we went on a journey into Manhattan on a weekend to assess and try to obtain some of this extra equipment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out that I hope the statute of limitations is up on this, but it turned out that they had a lot of stuff that Hofstra could use for the TV side of the program. They had rear screen projectors and uh, all kind, all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So our intent to recover some old tape recorders and microphones turned into we emptied the place out. Okay, there's no other way to say it. We took everything that wasn't nailed down, and we benefited by that. They never. I don't know if they ever filed a complaint. Jeff never said a word, but I think they were a little surprised to see that most of their stuff was gone when they came in on Monday. But we put it to good use for a good purpose, our noble cause. So
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I love the idea of this band of interesting, creative people with Jeff's leadership. Just people walking in with ideas and saying, "Well, let's figure it out," or "Let's try this," or just making it happen. And I think largely flying under the radar of the university. I don't imagine you
yes,
guys were getting a lot of support from the school.
no, we were not, and so we were almost like an island unto ourselves. At that time, like you said, it was mostly a commuting school. So I mean, most of us commuted. They were in the process. They had gotten a lot of money from the federal government, from the military, um, and they were building. I mean, they built. I don't know. I forget uh, how tall the new library was. A 10-story library.
Right.
And across Hempstead Turnpike, they were building 15-story dormitories and a bridge across, pedestrian bridge across the road,
Hmm.
and I mean, it was booming. It was booming. But the radio station, which was a unique and invaluable asset, not just to the university, but to the whole community. Uh, the only educational radio stations in those days were out of New York City. I think NYU had one,
Hmm.
WBAI, if I remember correctly,
Yep.
did a lot of educational programming and stuff. And we would go into those stations every so often and, try to learn from them or even participate in some of what they were doing. So it was really it was a vital, active component, and it had action orientation. We got it done. We made things happen.
Hmm. Earlier on, you mentioned the time period being the Vietnam War, and as America's mobilization was increasing in late 1964 to 1965, and more young men were being sent off into service. There was increasing feelings, especially among people who would have been your age at the time. Some people were very supportive of the war, and some people were very much against it, and that would definitely be part of the mood of the times. What was the feeling on the campus of Hofstra like at the time, and what was the feeling at the radio station like?
Well, you're talking about a situation that is almost indescribable. I mean, Hofstra was getting a lot of money from the military, had a huge military presence at the university, which by today's standards would probably be considered bizarre,
Mm.
right? I mean, they had an armory on campus. um, rifles, all kinds of stuff. You had when you were accepted to Hofstra, you had to join ROTC for 2 years. That was part of their deal with the military. So your freshman and sophomore years, you were in ROTC, and you had to buy a uniform, an Army uniform.
Hmm.
And on Fridays, Fridays was I don't know, military day. You had to show up for school in uniform. As you walked around the campus, you had to salute the other guys that were in uniform. And then at from 4 to 6, we had what we called common hour, um, which in true federal government, you know, kind of specifications, it's common hour for 2 hours.
Hmm.
So, yeah. But so we had to come and learn such wonderful things like weapons of mass destruction, nuclear war techniques, the manual of arms. We had to shoulder rifles and practice the manual of arms, where you're picking it up and putting it on one shoulder, then switching it over to the other shoulder, and snap to, and all that kind of stuff. We'd have to line up for inspections, and they'd look at our uniforms and decide if they were clean enough or if the buttons were polished enough. And I mean, the older guys, once you got to be a junior, you had to sign on the dotted line, and you were in the Army until you graduated from college, and they'd come out as a second lieutenant in the Army, and they'd give you a ticket to Vietnam and kill you. So, um, it was a very emotional time with an awful lot going on, uh, and it was hard to take it all in. It really was.
Hmm. Was this the time period that I know that there was a time period where young men who were in college could get a deferral, perhaps, or a family deferral if they were married and had children? Was that this time period, or was that a little bit later?
No, that was at that time. It was there were different classifications when you went to register with selective service.
Mm-hmm.
So your selective service office is usually in your hometown or very nearby, and you go there and they ask you questions. You fill out forms, and they determine your military status. If you were a full-time matriculated student in a college or university, you would be granted a 2S uh, classification.
Hmm.
1A was ready. You're on the line, ready to go. You're getting called up. You're getting sworn in, and you're either that or you go and enlist somewhere.
Hmm.
There were other classifications. I'm not familiar with all of them, um, but they would the college, or the Hofstra in this case. Uh, well, I don't want to jump ahead to the main issue, really, which is when they tried to shut WVHC down.
Hmm.
Because, in my opinion, that was because of a lot of the anti-war programming and some of the issues that we were surfacing and broadcasting about, which the military folks did not like.
Hmm.
It was a counterpoint to their narrative, I guess.
Hmm.
So, although WVHC was always tried to air both sides of an issue, but it was an environment where they only wanted one side aired.
Yeah.
You know.
I've gotten the impression from other folks who were at WVHC in the 1960s is that in terms of programming, Jeff tried to keep things a little bit on the I don't know if conservative side is the more right side, but not necessarily rock and roll music, trying to stay away from things that were controversial. But at the same time, people said, well, there were folk music shows and protest shows and people who had, wanted to have discussions about what the war was about and the direction of the government, so on and so forth. What do you remember about the programming?
Well, it was very eclectic in that sense, right? It was all over the place, different subjects, all different sides of the issues. It was somewhat conservative. I mean, at that time, you were walking on eggshells.
Hmm.
As a, I mean, you were broadcasting out to the general public in the backyard of the university, and they certainly wanted to, exercise some editorial discretion on what was going on because you're representing Hofstra University, right? To a certain extent. But we didn't look at it that way. We looked at it, as I recall, we looked at the issues.
Hmm.
We looked at the music. We looked at doing, creative things. Uh, and we covered sports, and we did have different music programs. We did have folk music programs and top 40 stuff a little bit, classical music, jazz,
Mm-hmm.
IAA.
All
That's
right.
my man Fred, and different types of programming. It was we call it a block. I think we used to call it a block programming
Mm-hmm.
uh, format, rather than having one kind of, your jazz station or your classical music station or your talk station. Um, we had good equipment. The equipment that we had was good, uh, and but it was simple.
Hmm.
It wasn't a whole lot of stuff. I mean, we had uh, cart machines, where you would record sometimes public service announcements or various things that you'd play on carts. You had the two turntables in there. You had a couple of racks behind you with reel-to-reel tape machines, 10-inch reel tape machines, and learning how to use all that and get the effects and quality that you wanted. It was a part of the learning process of just doing it. You got
Mm-hmm.
to get in there and do it, and so we had a good time, and we did some remote broadcasting at times for the sporting events, and that was live. We carried them live, and we also used cassette recorders to go around and record interviews, and then come back and create the program. So all different kinds of things going on, and
I
um,
mean, this sounds like a professional level radio station being run by, Jeff Krause, who's in his late 20s, and all these ambitious people, and largely it seems for a long time the university was somewhat indifferent to the radio station, and you and I had a prior conversation, and you indicated that sometime during your time there things started to shift with the university's opinion of the radio station.
well, yeah, I mean, and it really, I think Jeff knew what was coming.
Hmm.
He didn't tell us. I think he was working behind the scenes to try to stave off where it was going. One day, it was after it was the beginning of the summer of '67. After two semesters, my first two semesters, I came in on a Saturday to do some work that I needed, some productions that I needed to do, and some different things. So I drove into Hofstra, and I was the only one there. I opened up the radio station to get in. Nobody was around, and I look up on the wall, and there's a big sign on the wall that says WVHC is dead.
That's that's chilling. What was that? Was it a handwritten sign? Was it?
Yep. It was a handwritten sign that was hastily plastered up on the wall so that when you come in, you saw it. And I was like, well, what the hell does this mean? What do you mean it's dead? So I got on the phone and called Jeff, and he said the university was shutting us down. Uh, and the reason that was given, they actually had shut us down. They had turned the power off on the transmitter. So when I arrived that Saturday morning to do some work, the studio was open. I could have made all the pretend radio things I wanted to do,
Hmm.
but we were no longer on the air. And the reason they gave was because I still marvel at this, at the utter brass that they had to offer this excuse and say they couldn't afford the electricity for the radio transmitter,
Hmm.
which probably took about as much power as it took to light up the building that the radio station was at. I mean, it didn't take a lot of power. It
Right.
was, the transmitter was there. It took, I don't know how, it was a 250-watt station. So how much electricity does it take to generate 250 watts? I mean, for Christ's sake, you know. So we were in shock. We were our world had crashed. We were deflated. We were frustrated. We were angry. We were sad, and we called a meeting. This is where the animal house and action potential and
Hmm.
action orientation differentiation shows up. And we said, well, what are we going to do? Now, this was the age of the 60s. There was a lot of protests going on in the 60s for different things, against the war, for the war, whatever. And we said, well, we're not taking this laying down. They shut it off. We turned it back on,
Hmm.
and we initiated a marathon broadcast around, because at that time WVHC was a daytime kind of operation. It'd sign on in the morning and you'd sign off by midnight,
Hmm.
right? And we signed on 24 hours a day. Uh, the approach we took was, we could call the university names, right? We could scream how they're warmongers. We could complain about the military. We could do all those things. But that's not what we did. What we did was we said, we love Hofstra University, and geez, they can't afford the electricity. They reluctantly have shut down the radio station because it's burning 300-watt light bulbs, and so we'll raise the money. We will raise the money to help our alma mater out, which of course was very unwelcome help.
Right. Right.
Um, and they didn't quite know how to react to the fact that we had turned it back on, and we're now surfacing the issue in such a way. What could they say? Oh, they want to raise the money. Sure, why not? We're not against educational programming. We're not against what WVHC is doing. We just can't afford the electricity, but they're going to help us out and try to raise the money. Let's see what happens. So that's what we did, and we demonstrated. But when we demonstrated, we did it we wore jackets and ties.
Hmm.
We didn't raise our voices. We were polite. We didn't block traffic. We stayed on the sidewalks around the administration building and around the campus. And, we didn't say, screw this university. We said, oh, let's help this university, because they really do want us to be on the air. They just can't afford the electricity. And we did everything we could. We wound up simulcasting our marathon with multiple broadcast commercial radio stations in the area, because the people that worked at them all came through Hofstra and all came through WVHC.
Right.
So when the word spread to the community, to what was going on, everybody fell in line. We were on the front page of the New York Times. We were on television news. We were being talked about on every major radio station in the New York metropolitan area, and and we were doing it all from the standpoint that we're just trying to help. We're just here to help. Um, as I mentioned earlier, my family we had a printing business, and I had my father print us up bumper stickers, which were popular in those days, still a little bit maybe. And it was a bright orange, glowy, bumper sticker that said "Save WVHC,"
Mm.
and we spread them far and wide, right? Well, don't you know, someone from the Hempstead School District saw one of these things and said, what's happening to WVHC? Because the educational community, the schools and high schools and so on, and school community, uh, all valued WVHC, valued the programming, valued that opportunity to learn how to do that, and participate in that and express yourself uh, in all the various ways that you can on radio. and brought that programming to, a fairly dense area. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Nassau County, you could hear us in Queens, you could hear us all through Nassau County, and you could hear us in Western Suffolk County to a certain extent. So, we were broadcasting to an audience that was huge. And once we started getting simulcasted and getting attention from our friendly neighborhood other commercial radio stations, we literally reached millions of people,
Mm.
and got to tell our story in a positive way. Um, but it was two faced in a way, because everybody knew we hated the university for doing this, and that they were warmongers, and they were taking all this money from the military and forcing you to be in ROTC, and and trying to shove that down your throat at a time when we were involved in what was an illegal war, where so many people died and so much property was destroyed, and just terrible things have happened. So um, the Hempstead School District said, you know what, we can't lose this educational resource in our community. So they ponied up the money to pay the electric bill
Isn't that amazing?
for the university. And what could Hofstra do? I mean, they had already taken the position. They couldn't back down. They said, "Well, we can't afford. It's not that we want to shut the radio station. We can't afford the electricity.
Mm.
We're building a couple of 15-story buildings across the street, and but that electricity from that radio transmitter, boy, that is killing us."
Mm.
And so they had to accept it graciously. Thank you for helping us save our radio station. And WVHC was resuscitated.
Mm. And as I like to say to my high school students when I tell them a story, I said, and then everyone lived happily ever after. And
Not exactly.
yeah, that's always the catch.
Yeah. Well, a bunch of us got kicked out of Hofstra for this. After it was all said and done, and the radio station was saved, and the publicity was out, and so on, I went home to sleep. I was exhausted, and the next day I got a phone call from the dean of students, or whatever he was, to come in. I had to come into the university to discuss my situation. Now, I had signed up for a couple of extra courses for that summer, and I blew them uh, working to save the radio station.
Right.
So he called me in, and I wasn't the only one he called in, but he called me, and I was a key figure in the radio station in those days. And he said, "Mr. Fricano," he said, "your grade point average is marginal. You're still above the cutoff, you know. So we could keep you as a student at Hofstra if we wanted to."
Mm.
I'll never forget these words. I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Mr. Fricano, we don't want your kind here.
Mm.
And just so you know, we notified your draft board a week ago that you were no longer a matriculated student in this university, and you are now eligible for the draft."
Mm.
They wanted to kill me. So I guess they were pretty mad. Um, and that was the game, right? That was the game. I got kicked out. Fred Kunzman, who was one of the engineers at the station, who helped rig the simulcasting with the other stations, and was a key figure at WVHC. And I don't know. I don't know who else might have gotten booted. I can't remember. It's a
Mm.
long time ago. But so my fraternity, Pipe and Bowl, held a going away party for me in Bill's Meadowbrook Inn,
Mm-hmm.
um, because my parents had been looking into moving to a warmer climate, and so there was a lot of literature at home, and one of the things was some literature from the U.S. Virgin Islands, from St. Thomas, and they had a College of the Virgin Islands, and it had an academic building, and it had a beach, and it had a golf course, a 9-hole golf course, and the tuition was $5 a credit hour.
That's a little bit better.
Yeah. So at the going away party, I announced to the crowd that I was leaving for St. Thomas to go down there and see what it's like, and get immediately back into school so that I could recover my school deferment, college deferment for 2S status. So at the party, Fred Kunzman was trying to deal with the same issues of being booted out, and they did the same thing to him. We already told your draft board a week ago, so you might as well pack your bags. And he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going. I don't know what you're doing." I said, "But I'm going to St. Thomas." He said, "Oh, maybe I'll go with you." And his family owned a travel agency in Queens, Kunzman Travel, and so they helped us set up the tickets. And Fred and I and my father got on a Pan Am jet at what was then Idlewild Airport,
Mm-hmm.
and we headed out for San Juan. We had to fly into San Juan and then grab a commuter plane over to St. Thomas. And from there, it was a question of getting enrolled and dealing with those issues. But so when I got there, naturally, to work, I worked in radio.
Mm-hmm.
I worked at W. It was WBNB, radio and television. They had a television. The St. Thomas is 13 miles long and 1,500 feet high and 3 miles wide. So at the top of St. Peter's Mountain, there was a tower. Originally that tower was sitting on the base of what was a World War II gun turret,
Wow.
because they actually sunk a German submarine off the north side of St. Thomas, and so they had this little rinky-dink in a little kind of ranch house radio TV station, and again it was signed off at midnight. There was no round-the-clock television. The radio station was an AM 1,000-watt station, which was also signed off at midnight. And so that's where I worked. And there was another radio station on St. Thomas, WSTA. And so WBNB was kind of like, I mean, there's no easy way to say this. WBNB was kind of like the white people's radio station. WSTA was the natives radio station, we referred to as natives. And so they played the calypso music and all that stuff, and we played top 40 and whatever. Again, it was more block programming, music wise format. And so I worked for the radio and TV station, and then at another time I worked for WSTA for a while. BNB was interesting because it stood for Bob and Bob Moss and Bob Noble.
Mm-hmm.
These two guys went down there to open a radio and television station. Bob Moss was a television producer. He put Jackie Gleason on the air.
Wow.
And Bob Noble was an ABC network vice president. So they had their own thing going there. And I came and went back and forth from the islands here and there a couple of years. And they had a guy named John Daly, I think his name was. He was from WNEW in New York City. He had been hired to come down to take over WSTA to try to bring it a little more up to contemporary needs. And I was back home on Long Island at the time, and he called me up and asked me if I would come back and work for him on WSTA, which I did. And then I was recruited again to go back to WBAB, BNB. They wanted me to try to as they refer to it, bring us down off the hill.
Mm.
BNB was located in the penthouse suite of the Virgin Isle Hilton Hotel. WSTA was in a little ramshackle building down in Frenchtown, an area called Frenchtown,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know if that exists anymore per se. Frenchtown was a segregated area populated by European descendants that kept pretty much to themselves, and they were referred to as Frenchies. the Frenchies. So we had the Frenchies in Frenchtown, WSTA, WBNB, and we covered St. Croix as well. Our signal was to St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix, which was about 40 miles to the south.
If I could
Um,
double back for a second, I mean, you go down and you finish your schooling in the islands. What was what was the effect on your draft status? I mean, at some point you're going to finish school. Is the U.S. military coming looking for you, or do they move on to someone else?
I had a strategy. I mean, I make no bones about the fact that I didn't want to go to Vietnam. I did not want to go into the military. I didn't agree with what was going on. Both my parents were veterans. My
Hmm.
father was a special agent in the counterintelligence corps in the army uh, when during World War II. My mother was a Lady Marine.
Hmm.
And so they were both very proud Americans, proud of their service, and they were both diametrically opposed to what was going on in Vietnam, and didn't want us to get anywhere near that. But the problem was Hofstra really wanted to nail me, right? So I never saw myself as being that much of a target, but I was, and so they, in order to obtain that 2S deferment, you had to be matriculated, which means you had to be full time. Was defined,
Hmm.
as I recall, as 12 credit hours minimum per semester, and then you would be considered matriculated. And Hofstra would not release my records
Oh.
to the College of the Virgin Islands. They kept coming up with one excuse after another to cause my deferment to be withheld. So, being a student of you know how our government was working at the time, and to this day, I try to pay close attention. I found out that if you follow their rules, you can easily overcome the bureaucracy because they are
Hmm.
defeated by their own bureaucracy. So there was a requirement that if you left, my home was in Bayshore. If I changed my address from where I lived at 350 Brook Avenue, I had 10 days to notify the draft board of my new location, so they knew where to get you, right? And
Right.
so I filled out the form. I went to St. Thomas. I went down to they had a draft board there too, and I picked up the necessary form that had to be filed, and I went to the post office to mail it back to my draft board. And well, a 6 cent stamp, your mail would be postmarked and sent on a barge back up to New York. Uh, about a 6 week turnaround time there. Or you could buy an airmail stamp for 10 cents and it would be there in 2 days or 3 days. So I bought a 6 cent stamp and had it postmarked and dropped it in the mail. And my address at that time was care of General Delivery in St. Thomas. Get a little more specific. So about 6 weeks and 2 days later, I would get a mail from the draft board with a new form to fill out as to my educational status and proof of my
Hmm.
educational deferment. Well, I couldn't supply that because Hofstra wouldn't release the records. So when they started getting kind of close, I would get on an airplane and go home and visit for a couple of 10 days and change my address back to 350 Brick Avenue right before I would leave for St. Thomas. Get back to St. Thomas, get another 6 cent stamp, and let them know my new address. My file must be 12 inches thick because I was writing to the draft board. I was sending them pictures. I was, and they got hip to what I was doing. That I was following their rules wasn't violating the law, but it put me just out of their reach because of the
Mm.
time delay in getting the correspondence. So they broke the law to try to get me. They transferred my draft records from Bayshore, New York, to the draft board in St. Thomas.
Oh.
So I didn't need the 6 cent stamp anymore. It was all, local mail. And they had a huge draft call up at that time in the Virgin Islands. Now, the Virgin Islanders, they could not vote in a presidential election, right? They had a
Right.
representative, a guy named Ron DeLuca, who actually worked with us at the radio station. He was the representative of the Virgin Islands to Congress at that time, but no vote. And so the Virgin Islanders were furious that they were being called up to go to Vietnam. It was just that simple. They were trying to grab everybody anywhere they could. And as a territory of the United States, they were able to do that, even though the Virgin
Right.
Islanders couldn't vote, and they resented it bitterly. So they had me, and I got called up with the boys from St. Thomas. They put us on a bus, took us to the airport, flew us over to San Juan, to Fort San Juan, and for processing. And we had to fill out the forms. We had to see the psychiatrist. We had to bend over and spread your cheeks, type of physical exam. And from there it was into the next room, raise your right hand, and you were gone. I mean, that was that simple. And so I got to the physical exam, and I said to this is happens to be true. I said to the guys, I said, look, I said, I have a problem in my back. I said, I've been going back to New York to my orthopedic surgeon for treatment. And so I'm just calling this to your attention that I have a problem in my back. So I said, okay, you're going to have to come back. We're going to get some x-rays. So they sent me back to St. Thomas. And I didn't know what I was going to do at that point. I seriously considered just disappearing down islands. But
Mm.
they sent me another plane ticket back to San Juan. So I went there to go through the physical exam. And the orthopedist for the Army looked at me for about a total of maybe 10 seconds and decided that I was perfectly physically fit for duty.
Mm.
And I was supposed to then go into the next room, raise my hand, and goodbye. Uh, well, I got pissed off, and I was like, "What do you mean there's nothing wrong with my back? Why have I been going to this doctor?" And so I said, "Give me my records." He said, "You can't have them." Some choice words, and I said, "Give me those records." I grabbed them up off his desk. I said, "Where's your boss?" So I went down the hallway, and I'll never forget this guy. He was a Major Sanchez. He was a physician, and he said, well, "What's up?" I said, I'm angry." I said, "I want to subpoena these records. I want to subpoena your orthopedist. I want to subpoena you." He goes, wait, what's going on?" I said, "Well, I've been seeing this top orthopedic surgeon on Long Island for a condition on my back. My sister has the same congenital defect that I have." I go, "And your doctor tells me there's nothing wrong with me. So I'm going to sue the doctor back on Long Island for medical malpractice all this time. And I'm calling you people." And I went off on him. And he goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." He goes, "Calm down." He goes, "I have to review your case. Let me review your case." So I handed him my x-rays. I handed him everything. He goes, "Who's your doctor on Long Island?" "It's a Dr. Koenig out of Port Jefferson." He goes, "Dr. Thomas Koenig?"
Mm.
I go, "Yeah, Dr. Thomas Koenig." I, I said, "Do you know him?" He says, "I interned under him at Meadowbrook Hospital." He goes, "He's a fine surgeon and physician." And he snaps my x-ray up on the viewer, and he starts asking me questions about Dr. Koenig and how he's doing, because he had a back problem too. And he just takes out a crayon and he draws a circle around my entire back, pulls the x-ray down, sticks it back in the envelope, and starts writing. And I go, "Can you tell me what that is?" And he said, I'm classifying you 1Y. You're draftable only in the event of national emergency.
Wow.
I thought of that, as far as I'm concerned, that was divine intervention. And um, shortly thereafter, they launched the birth date system. Date of your birth, 365 days or 365 numbers, and they drew out the various days, and that was your new draft status number. And out of the 365 possibilities, my birthday came up 364 or 363 or something like that. I mean, they would have had to draft everybody in the country before they got to me.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so that was that, and that was the end of that problem. And I stayed in the Virgin Islands for a while, and I was continued to work at the radio station there. I actually helped rename the station. They were going through. They wanted to update their, so it wasn't BNB anymore, Bob and Bob. It was now we changed it to WVWI, which was kind of plagiarized a little bit from Hofstra because WVHC was the voice of the Hofstra community, right? WVHC,
Mm-hmm.
and so I call it WVWI, the voice of the West Indies.
There you go.
And when you draw that out, when you draw WVWI out, it makes a radio wave.
Smart. Very
Yeah,
clever. Clever.
it was.
Wow.
It's still WVWI, and there's. Last time I talked to a friend of mine down there, a guy named Lee Carl, who was still working in radio and television down there. We had a good catch up time, and um, he was a. I don't know if he's still alive. He was older, a lot older than I was, but that was my introduction to the Caribbean and to some very fascinating experiences from there. Uh,
Yeah, wow. In recent weeks and months, I've been interviewing a lot of students who are at Hofstra in recent years, in the late 2010s, and graduating within the last 5 or 6 years. And obviously, they went through the COVID lockdown and all the extraordinary things that went with that. And I find it really fascinating to see, well, how did the station adapt? How did students adapt? What were their impressions? It's still rather recent, and now talking about your experiences in the 1960s and the Vietnam War and all the things that you went through. It's amazing to see how no matter the time period, there's always something extraordinary happening, and what young people and the radio station do, and what it means to them. It's such an amazing, I don't know if parallel is the right word, but it's a thread that runs through a lot of stories. Is that, we didn't expect this, we didn't sign up for this, but we're dealing with it, and we're making the best of
right.
it. It's pretty
Well, and
amazing.
I think for me, as I look back on some of the things now I eventually became a paramedic.
Hmm.
I had been doing volunteering and ambulance work in those days as well, and eventually made a career in the emergency medical services. 57 years of doing ambulance calls, and I'm a New
Wow.
York City paramedic, and um, I've learned that I heard it put this way: life is like a piano. The white keys are all the good moments in life. The black keys are all the sad and tragic moments in life. And when you play them together, you're playing the music of life. And so, as these things happen, whether it's a COVID lockdown, whether it's AIDS, whether
Hmm.
it's war, whether it's uh, any one of a variety of other things that happen in life, life is not black and white. It's not intended to be. We may live in the same time, in the same time frame, but we're all going through completely different realities. And so
Hmm.
we have to take that into account. And I think that's why a thing like WVHC is so important, because it allows you to explore those kind of thoughts and surface the different things that are going on in life. I mean, one of the things that the big issues of the day, and we covered this for WVHC, was folk masses in the Catholic Church, where
Hmm.
instead of organ music and like that, they were bringing guitars into the church, and people were singing,
Hmm.
and playing folk music songs and hymns and whatever. And this was a huge cultural transformation. So we did a series of programs on that and recorded the masses and talked to the priests and talked to the people who were attending the folk mass. And a lot of people didn't like the folk mass; they wanted the traditional mass with Latin being spoken,
Hmm.
which was still being spoken at that time before they moved to English languages. And so we have disease and we lose loved ones. Uh, we can become disabled. We can lose everything we have, or we can be fabulously wealthy and be the happiest people on earth. Life is an unlimited experience. Anything can happen,
Mm.
and what counts is how you deal with it. You know.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of us learn a lot of valuable lessons through the radio station and through the community. It's an important time in life. You're learning how to be an adult and learning what you want to do with the rest of your life. But it's the community that Jeff Krause created and then were carried on by so many other people has been so important and valuable to so many people. And I'm just Lon, I'm just honored and thrilled that you would share your stories with us. This has been quite a journey. It's quite a ride you
Yeah,
had.
it's still going on too. One of the things that I appreciated from Jeff was when after because obviously when I went to being a key person in the radio station, when I had to leave and go to St. Thomas, it was hard on us emotionally because we were close and stuff. So he promoted me to
Mm.
WVHC's one and only Caribbean correspondent.
With all the perks and benefits that
All
go
the
along
perks
with
and
it, I'm
benefits that
sure.
go along with it. And I'll tell you something else. It was my experience in radio, both in high school and then at Hofstra, that I think gave me the wherewithal to fight for my life.
Yeah.
Because we had action orientation. We didn't just take it laying down. We took it head on. We got involved. We did what we could. You know, sometimes it's the irresistible force meeting the immovable object in life,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
sometimes life can really surprise you. And
Yeah.
um, I'm a big believer in the spiritual side of life. I'm not a religious person, but I believe in the energy flows and the things that make up our universe and our bodies and our the connections to each other. And we're all on this journey, to find ourselves, but also to find each other. And when you go through life, good times, bad times, right? White keys and black keys. When
Yeah.
you go,
Well, your instinct that brought you to radio, you mentioned earlier, is the fundraiser for muscular dystrophy, and that brought you to radio and recording and these things, and that brought you to Hofstra eventually, and put you in touch with all these people, and that led to all the things. I have to think that there's, like you said, there's connections and there's rhythms flowing through the universe that put you in a place and leads you to these things. It's remarkable. It's amazing.
people have to find out who they are. You have to find
Mm.
out. You have to become comfortable with what your purpose in life is, and the hard part for people is separating out all the false ideas that you get pounded into your head as to what's important in life, whether it's money or fame you know or whatever it may be, or artistic expression. And when you find your niche, the universe works with you. That's how I kind of look at it. And I mean, how in the world, in the middle of the Vietnam War, 1,500 miles from home, in the middle of the ocean, did I find the one doctor who knew my doctor?
And you had the voice, you had the wherewithal to advocate for
Right.
yourself. You had learned through all of your activism and your radio time that you need to be able to communicate a certain message, and you probably were motivated by various things, but you had the skills to be able to go and say, hey, this isn't right, I want you came up with a strategy and it got you to the right person.
That was a very interesting time in life, and I'll tell you that the experiences I had in my life subsequently to that time, once I was fully engaged in my career as a paramedic, uh, that pale. I mean, that the experience at VHC in the Vietnam War pale by comparison
Hmm.
to the slice of life that I have witnessed, from childbirth to tragic deaths to miracles to raising the dead. I've raised the dead. Paramedic, you come to a house, somebody's laying there on the floor dead, and you bring them back to life and give them back their life. I mean, you know, how do you measure that against the other things that happen to you in life? You have
Hmm.
so many. Anybody can be who they want. They really, really, truly can, for the most part, if they can feel it, if they know what it is, and they just go for it. And we don't all have to be the most famous artist or the most famous DJ or the most famous
Right.
politician, but we have to find our song and sing it.
Hmm. Lon, this has been amazing. Thank you. Thank you so very much. This is great.
Well, I appreciate you having the interest to talk to an old has-been radio announcer, and
No.
but I would take this opportunity to thank, as strange as this may seem, to thank Hofstra University for what they gave me, both in the experience of WVHC and how that changed my life and became such a big part of my life, but also for the life lesson that they taught me, unintentionally perhaps, but I'm grateful to them, and I am grateful to the people who were to Jeff Krause and to the people who were in that group, in that family, who stuck together and who really supported each other. It was a wonderful, incredible experience.